You're watching the 2020 Summit on What Next for Wireless Infrastructure, hosted by the University of Surrey 5G Innovation Centre in association with TelecomTV and supported by ETSI. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV, and we are broadcasting live with our final session of the first day of the Summit. Now, this is your chance to get involved. We are hosting a Q&A programme with our guest presenters. We're live and we are waiting to hear from you. We've already received a lot of questions throughout the day, but if you haven't already done so, now is your chance. Please use the form on the website. And to answer one of the questions we have already received, yes, all content will be available to watch later, individually on demand. Our chair for day one, Adrian Scrase, CTO of ETSI, will be our moderator for this session. But first, let me introduce our panelists, and we welcome back Tony Scales, Head of 5G Programme Development, DCMS, with the UK Government, Andreas Mueller, General Chair of 5G ACIA, and also Head of Communication and Network Technology with Bosch Corporate Research, Dinesh Verma, IBM Fellow, Distributed AI, IBM TJ Watson Research Centre, Dr. Jordi Jimenez, Head of Technology, 5G MAG Association, and Peiying Zhu, VP of Wireless Research, Huawei, and an IEEE Fellow. And with that, I'll hand it over to Adrian.
Thank you, Guy, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the whole purpose of today's presentations is really be to try and understand where are we going to be at the mid-generation point, at the halfway between the 5G that we have today and the 6G we will have in the future. So we're looking out roughly 5 years. And so my first question to the panelists is really how they see that midpoint being defined. Will it be defined by much improved system performance over what we have today? Will it be defined by the widespread adoption of augmented reality or artificial intelligence? Will it be defined by the expansion of our existing capabilities into new industry domains? Or will it be defined by some other attribute? So if you could pick just one defining attribute, what would that be and why? Now I'm going to go first to Dinesh, because Dinesh, you're a very strong proponent of multi-access edge computing, and you mentioned that at length during your presentation. But is this how you see as the defining attribute of the midpoint, or some other attribute?
Yes, I do. Like if you look at 5G, it offers multiple new innovations. And if I look at what is going to drive the adoption, what will be there at the 5G at the midpoint in 5 years, it would be determined primarily by the users, those who use the network. And those who use the network tend to see what new capabilities the network is offering, or the business aspect. Is it going to reduce cost? So many of the innovations, while they're wonderfully and very appealing to us as technologists, like the wonderful aspects of localization or higher speed, or the fact that things will be implemented as software, are not directly visible or directly impacting the users of the end users of the network. So if I look at a 5G user, for example, an industrial manufacturing floor, what really is it getting out of 5G? It can already connect at high speed. It already can lay out within its spectrum Wi-Fi or other alternatives to the connectivity. What it cannot do that easily is the breakout of the local access point, which combines the ability for SIM cards or the cellular phones covering large areas, or very high speed direct line of sight things to an edge site. It offers privacy. It offers the ability to run AI locally, which expands the set of applicable things. The initial set of offerings that has come from the cellular carriers in and around the topic of mobile access edge computing is limited, is is early part of the experience, because the cellular operators are providing something for the new time. I think in 5 years it will be a lot more mature. It will create a new innovative capabilities for people, whether it be in Industry 4.0, whether it be finance, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be the automotive industry. And I do believe that that is going to transform the future of 5G. That's going to be the defining application of 5G. If you look at it, each generation of the network from 2G onwards has created something completely transformative. In 2G, text messaging was the better solution. In 3G, instead of the existing things, the ability of YouTube and over the top to deliver media was the defining thing. 4G, you can see social media and Twitter and Facebook were the defining thing. In 5G, if something is going to be defining, it will be the rise of edge applications defined by mobile multi-access computing. REST is wonderful technical advantage, but as users of the network, I consider that business as usual. I believe 5 years, whether or not edge computing has advanced in capability is going to be the defining thing for 5G generation. Thank you.
Okay, Tony, do you agree with this view that it's all about edge computing, or do you see it another way?
Well, Dinesh and I have rehearsed this well. I'm going to disagree because I think that's the right thing to do on a panel session anyway. I think that I think multi-MEC is clearly an interesting feature, but I think that the thing that will really drive the changes that we're looking for in the transformation of the marketplace is actually stories. Stories from trials and test beds and stories from real experiences of using 5G. I think that's what creates the momentum in the market and drives demand in every technology I've ever worked with. I think Dinesh is right to point to the previous generations. It was those key sort of applications that got people excited. I think with 5G is such a broad topic. There are so many different aspects of it that I think it's difficult to pin down one thing that's going to define the future. But I think it is in the configurability of 5G networks that make them very distinct from previous generations, and the software definition of them is key to that. So for example, I mean, one of the things that I really get excited about is in one of our Liverpool-based healthcare trials, the point there is not about 5G as a premium service that's delivering an enhanced mobile broadband service. It's about its ability to deliver a very cheap service that supports broadband into very low income households, to deliver solutions to chronic care needs, to loneliness, and to make people feel safe in their homes, particularly during the COVID crisis that we're seeing now, and allows for much lower cost delivery of healthcare and social care to those kinds of communities. That's an unexpected outcome from 5G for me. I think at the other end of the spectrum, we've got the factory of the future BAE Systems is putting together, where they're looking to reduce the cost of producing the Tempest jet by 50%. So it's going to be those kind of stories across many different use case areas, many different vertical sectors that will drive demand for the technology in the end. I don't think it will be any one particular technical feature of 5G. I think it will be all of them taken together.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned factories of the future, so let's move directly to Andreas, because that's the entire subject matter of your presentation, Andreas. How do you see this midpoint being defined? What's the big game changer there for you?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I mean, of course, as Tony just said, 5G is a very broad technology, and it includes many different aspects. And of course, we will see new applications in different verticals. Of course, edge computing will play a role, and also software will play a role. But if I really have to pick one specific feature that, from my perspective, will make a difference in 5 years from now, let's say, so then I would say it's definitely non-public networks. So that's a new development, of course, that just started recently. I mean, private networks, not public networks per se, are not new. So there were some ways to do that already before. But now there's really very good support from the standard perspective. And of course, there are also changes on the regulatory side. So there are some countries like Germany, like the UK, where an enterprise, for example, can apply for a local license now and then use the local license to set up a non-public network. United States, we have CBRS, which is a little bit different from this approach, but still may lead to the same result. And these are really significant changes, and we are just at the beginning of this journey from my perspective. And that's very important development, because it supports then also the developments in different verticals in an optimal way. So you mentioned Factory of the Future. That's of course my home turf. And there is a very strong demand for non-public networks for security reasons, for performance reasons, and so on. But the same is true basically for other verticals, right? If you look at healthcare in a hospital, or if you look at agriculture in a field. So it's an enabler to make 5G become a success in these verticals. And of course, there are now many changes, not just from a technical point of view, but also if you look at the ecosystem and the value chain in general. Because previously, I mean, the mobile communications market, network market was very mature, highly consolidated with a couple of vendors and so on. And that's, of course, because it was always about deploying 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 networks in a country. Now, if we have non-public networks and these many new applications that they support, and also the changes in the regulatory side, so that suddenly many different stakeholders can deploy such network, then there will be a lot more competition, and it will also trigger a lot of innovation. And it's what we are seeing already. I mean, there are many startups now being established and focusing on non-public networks and corresponding solutions. And also here, I think we are just at the beginning of the journey, and there will be much more to come. So suddenly there can be tailored infrastructure components, also then with the software. The focus of the technology developments. It's very easy then to develop some software components, maybe which is suitable for non-public networks in a certain domain. And also, if you look at the who will operate the networks and so on, of course, the big MNOs can play a role there, and certainly will play a role there. But it can also be many new micro operators, if you want, focusing especially on this new market segment. And that's why I really think that will be revolutionary. It may be disruptive, not just for the telco industry, but also for the vertical domains where these non-public networks are used. And so therefore, this is, from my perspective, really at the core of the next year, 3 to 5 years ahead of us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. We did actually have a question from the audience on this very subject. So let me push the point just a little further. You know, is it just about public and non-public networks, or do you really see the hybrid network configuration playing a role here, or do you really see it as public and non-public?
Yeah, the question, of course, is what does non-public mean? So for me, it means non-public, as the name suggests. So there's the public network, which are the networks deployed on a nationwide scale usually, and then everything else is a non-public network. And of course, the question is very good, actually, because there can be many different flavors of non-public networks. The extreme case would be to have a really self-contained non-public network, a standalone non-public network, as we say. That means you have a factory, for example. In the factory, you have a complete dedicated radio access network, a dedicated core, and it's a complete network basically inside a factory. That is one extreme, but there are also then these hybrid approaches that you also mentioned, which is maybe in collaboration also with a public network operator. For example, that you use the same radio access network for both the public network and also the non-public one. But then at the base station, you have a local breakout so that the local traffic stays local and is routed to a local core network, for instance, whereas the public traffic, the phone calls and so on that you're having are then routed to the public core in the public network. And so that's also something new. So suddenly there are many new ways how to deploy such a network, a lot of flexibility from an end user perspective, a factory owner, for example. You have suddenly a lot of choices. And again, that's very good because it stimulates the competition and triggers a lot of innovation. But to just sum up again, it's not black and white, but hybrid approaches, if you want, certainly play a very important role. And that's also included in my understanding of non-public networks in general.
Let's move to you, Pierre-Ying. How do you see things in 5 years' time? Where are we going to be?
I think for 5 years' time, it's all depending on from whose point of view. Let's say from consumer perspective, I think we will see the new service like AR, VR, and also mentioned the fixed wireless application to the home, for especially for rural or suburb area. They will see this application maturing, and with the maturing of this or wider deployment of this 5G, and we will see the actually new innovative usage of this type of capability. Then from, but one thing also is extremely important is I think I see the maturing of this vertical use cases, and especially when we put the this 5G into this vertical use cases, we will see the new requirement which we may not expected. Actually, those will provide a feedback to fuel the further development of 5G. I think they're going to form a loop. Like one of the example I can think about is at the beginning when we designed 5G, we were focused on how to improve the downlink capability, capacity, and so on. But now we actually found out with the vertical, you really need to improve drastically on the uplink performance. Similarly, I think we will have a better capability in terms of a high precision of positioning and low power consumption and so on. Those will actually also promote new, vertical use cases and so on. So this is also from my research and standard perspective. We see there will be a new capability to be added just to support more use cases and services. And some of the example I'm thinking that we probably will see better support for the millimeter wave, and we probably will think potentially we will have a new mid-band support, like a 6 gig area, which will offer. Hopefully, we can get a wide spectrum in that domain. Then we, in turn, will improve the capability of 5G. Then we will probably see some refarming of existing 3G, 4G spectrum, especially FDD type of system. So we'll see that kind of movement. And of course, we will see the combination of the AIA and 5G. This will in turn much improve the our 5G network. So I think it's hard to say exactly one aspect. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the uplink, because the situation we've all been facing in the last few months in participating in many of these panel sessions is that typically we are challenged by the uplink, because most of us don't have symmetric connections. And I think this is a demonstration that user requirements change over time, and maybe the future having more symmetric access is probably where we'll end up. Jordi, you've been very patient, and much of the work I saw in your presentation has yet to be standardized. It's work that you aspire to do in the coming releases. So where do you see us being in 5 years' time from a media point of view?
Right. So from the media industry, I would say we need to distinguish the part of the distribution and the part of production and contribution. I think for distribution, we will obviously see networks more capable of delivering, let's say, high demanding throughput applications, call it video, call it virtual reality, and so on. So that's going to drive, I think, connectivity in terms of downlink. When it comes to the production and contribution, the things that I were mentioning, and I think it's very related to what we have just discussed. Uplink, for instance, it's true. Uplink has always been, let's say, squeezed because the most demanding part was the downlink. But actually, for new applications in the professional domain, let's say for connecting cameras, journalists, flexibility in covering events and so on, we are going to see more demand on uplink, and also from user-generated content. I think that's also going to play a role. So in terms of throughput, I think in terms of connectivity, we are going to see an evolution in that domain. And as also have been said, I think the integration of verticals is an important component. And for this, perhaps, and from the media industry, as it has been said, we have sent our requirements very recently to SA1. So the technology will need still to be developed in the standards and later on coming to the market. So there is a long path to achieve this, but the integration of verticals in terms of the development of non-public networks, the development of software-defined networking, so that you can really develop your, or let's say plug very easily your functions, your media-related functions into the edge or into the cloud, and be able to let's say to easily deploy and make use of the 5G capabilities. I think that's really a driver for the implementation of these applications. But all of these needs indeed a proper assessment of the collaboration models. We were discussing this. Well, a standalone non-public network is indeed a model. Anything that is more going into the public network integrated domain, we need to study the appropriate models. And I think, well, I think that there are chances to do things properly and to establish really good collaborative models, so that in the end the industries can benefit of all the things that, well, in the term of 5 years will be arriving progressively to the market. With all of this in place, I think we will be in a good position to make use of all the innovation, let's say, that is coming.
So I was just going to take a contrarian position to some of what my esteemed colleagues have been saying. And I would like to assert that the private networks or the private or non-public networks aren't really a new phenomena. It seems like we are assuming that 5G is the only game in town for network connectivity, but it's not. As a matter of fact, even before 5G, even like current 4G, there are companies, there are people who set up private networks, who set up their own things. They use other technologies. Sometimes they use Wi-Fi, sometimes they use, depending on the situation, LoRa, sometimes the mining remote setup SCADA. And there are other alternative options to 5G to set up private networks. 5G is not really the first type of or choice that comes out to offer it, and nor is it clear that 5G private networks are going to be cheaper or in any way far superior to the other alternatives. For example, let's say at a manufacturing floor or in a building, or in a environment where I want to set up a private network, I could set up Wi-Fi. It goes around at least to a limited extent through the walls and things and gives me decent speed. 5G millimeter wave gives me speed which basically will be blocked by glass or or glass or other obstructions, and it's not clear that it's going to be a real cost saving. So in that case, I'm just kind of wondering, is the creation of private 5G network the real going to be something different or unique? Because it's an alternative which at the best is comparable to other alternatives to setting up private networks. And in that case, 5 years down the line, won't it be more likely that no one uses 5G to set up private network because the issue, you are running on unlicensed spectrum, you'll get the same performance. And if in an area where you don't have a spectrum contention, increasing implementation of software-defined radio and other things gives you an equally good performance. And it's unclear, like projecting forward, that it is going to be the big defining thing that 5G brings. There are existing alternatives, people are doing it already. And why would anyone change from current approaches of private network to some kind of unique advantage that private 5G support that private network support in 5G offers?
Okay, thank you for that. If I look at your presentation, Andreas, you make the very strong point in there that it's all about return on investment. That was one of the major messages in your presentation. Now, clearly you are, or at least you are, convinced that 5G is worth pursuing and that it will be worth the return on it. It will have a return on that investment. But how do you argue against what Dinesh is saying, that there are already other ways to do private network configurations? Why are you convinced that actually 5G could be a better offering than what we have today?
Yeah, I mean, of course, Dinesh is right. There are other ways to provide connectivity and wireless connectivity in a local setting. Wi-Fi certainly is one example. I'm not sure if we would call a Wi-Fi network a private network in the sense we mean it now with 5G, but to some extent it's basically similar, of course. And if we look at a typical Bosch plant, for instance, I mean, we have Wi-Fi networks in place today, so that's the status quo. But still, there's a big difference with 5G because 5G, well, it starts with the spectrum, right? That you have exclusive access to the spectrum, but it's also then the technology itself. It's more complete, if you want, than what Wi-Fi provides. Wi-Fi, to some extent, is a wireless link, and that's it. And 5G, of course, is a complete solution with very sophisticated quality of service capabilities, end-to-end, with strong security and so on. So there are many more things in it than just the better interface that 5G has as well. And Wi-Fi is what we have today. I just mentioned this, but still we would not run a closed-loop control application, for example, over Wi-Fi. Because it's simply not reliable enough, not dependable enough. But the hope and the expectation is that this is different with 5G. So of course, it's not just the fact that we can set up non-public networks what makes a difference. It's really that we can do this together with all the performance and the capabilities that 5G offers. And many of these capabilities, of course, are already there today. The question before was, okay, what is the defining feature in 5 years from now? And here I still believe that NPNs, non-public networks, really are at the heart of that, because also what has been said before for the media applications, that it's more about uplink than downlink. The same holds for a factory as well. If you have a closed-loop control application, for example, you have at least as much downlink traffic as uplink traffic. And if you look at the public networks, for example, they're still optimized for more downlink traffic, right, for video downloads and things like this. And there's already one argument why it's important to have the capability and the ability to deploy non-public networks, because setting the uplink downlink ratio is something that you cannot really address by just another network slice. It's really something that has to be configured by the network itself.
So I guess, I mean, from a performance point of view, it's about being more deterministic. But from an economic point of view, if we manage to get many industry sectors using common features, then we will create an economy of scale that we've never had before. So I guess the success of 5G is dependent also on the widespread adoption by many industry sectors. And I know certainly from the media point of view, this is why the broadcasting community is saying, well, that there could be a more economic way to distribute our content because of the sheer massive scale of 5G in its full-fledged deployment. Is that so, Jordi?
Right, exactly. I mean, if we look at, in the terms, I will comment on both sides in terms of distribution and production. If we see distribution, I mean, obviously, the global market in terms of devices, in terms of chipsets in the end, let's say, that 3GPP technology offers is as I said, is global, is massive. This cannot be compared to, for instance, when it comes to distribution, to traditional broadcast standards that are that have been shaped for the specific purpose of broadcasting, and they were, let's say, developed in regional organizations. So there is no global standard for doing media distribution, but there is one that we believe is 5G that can be, let's say, everywhere. And from the point of view of production, I tend to agree with what Andrea was saying. I think it's not just the fact of having non-public networks. I think it's the fact of having 5G, and then within 5G, the possibility of configuring the 5G network as a non-public network with all the degree that exists, of course, also to integrate with a public network. But it's the fact of having a global market. Also, well, in terms of the spectrum, if this can be harmonized, we have seen in Germany, the campus networks. There is also something similar in the UK. When if this can be harmonized, if equipment can be manufactured on these ranges, then, well, we benefit from the full range of capabilities that 5G provides: throughput, latency, reliability, flexibility, all, and even more. We can make use of these features for private uses. So I think that's as we see, that's the main benefit of the whole thing, of the whole 5G.
Okay, let me just change subject slightly, because so far we've been talking very much about industrial use cases, high performance, low latency. But one of the questions raised by the audience, which is a very valid one, is, what are we doing for rural coverage? Because it's not just about, in industry and mass deployment. It's also about covering the geographical regions which are either lowly populated or hard to cover from a terrestrial point of view. So, what can and should we be doing then to improve rural coverage? Now, I think this is something rather close to your heart, Tony.
Absolutely, Adrian. Thanks for the question. I think rural coverage is a very big part of our government's policy. It's Boris Johnson said on the steps of Number 10 when he was elected that he wanted to use digital technology and broadband in particular to level up the economy of the UK. I don't think when he said that he had any inkling of what was coming in terms of COVID. And of course, now we find ourselves absolutely living a much more distributed life, and the economy of the UK is suddenly 100% reliant on the networks that we all have got used to anyway, but suddenly it's become really mission critical. So many more people are doing as no doubt some of us are on the call today, are living in rural communities, which mean that those communities have suddenly got more money being spent in them than was before, and the community, there is an opportunity for those communities to come back to life. I think that there is a Build Back Better message here, which is if we can start to use our rural geography better, then we can reduce congestion, pressure on cities, reduce pollution, and live better lives, which I think is what governments are all about. But of course, we've got to have the networks there to make it happen. We've seen that history over the last few years. In the UK, we've had a network slice solution in LTE called the Emergency Services Network, you'll be familiar with. That's a collaboration between the government and mobile network operators to provide emergency service access into remote areas. We've also got an initiative that's been agreed this year as, again, a collaboration between DCMS and government and the 4 mobile operators called the Shared Rural Network. Again, it's an LTE solution today. But what we're going to see in the future, I'm sure, is a lot more rural coverage being provided through community type services and through these hybrid networks. And we will see some neutral host solutions. We'll see configurable networks that are designed to respond and react to where providing coverage and capacity where it's needed, when it's needed. We will see that through, no doubt, the spectrum auction that's coming up shortly in the UK for the 700 band that I think all of the operators are showing interest in providing services on. But we're also seeing through our trials, we've got 2 trials we've completed already, Rural First and 5 Grit, which were in remote areas of the UK. And we've got another 7 projects running now, all exploring the demand for rural coverage in the UK and the use cases that are going to drive it, as well as business models and spectrum and equipment type solutions to see what's going to work. And some of those have some really interesting consequences. So we have, for instance, the Monet Consortium in remote Wiltshire, where they're a very small operator, where they've solved the problem of how do they connect with the mainstream operators' networks. They've still got to get to the commercial agreements around that, but they've actually done the technical bit. That's probably the harder part of the problem to solve. I think we're going to see a lot more of those kinds of solutions coming through. And rural coverage to provide public sector services at a cost that can be afforded, education, medicine, healthcare, all of those things, as well as the ability to grow the rural economy through new businesses is absolutely critical to the future.
Perfect, thank you. Pei Ying, can I just pose one further question we've received from the audience to you? And this really is about security, because everything we've spoken about so far today really demands total trust in the networks that we have. So how do you see this mapping out over the next 5 years when the security threat vectors are going to increase multitudes by the number of nodes we will have in our network? So how do you see the security challenge being tackled over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think as you know, in 3GPP we have a security framework established at the beginning, and with the thinking that we will continue to address the security, add a security feature to the specific vertical or use case and so on, because I think it's not like a one solution fits all for every use case, because some use cases actually it's less demanding on the security, because the security is kind of a trade-off between the sometimes you have to sacrifice certain data rate or performance to trade this certain security aspect. So I believe we have a model to have this a customizable security aspect to make sure actually you put the enough security as needed. This is we have a framework well built now. This going forward is we also need to work with multiple organizations to make sure actually there's a mechanism to certify this type of security feature and make sure it's implemented well, or I think it's so to impose the security implementation properly.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Let me cut back to Guy. Guy, I'm conscious that the clock is running. Do we have urgent questions from the audience we need to address?
Yes, thanks, Adrian. We do indeed have some new questions that have just come in. I think we can hopefully fit in a couple of them. Let me just try and combine two questions into one here. Question from the audience is, what role does the panel see space and non-terrestrial networks playing in the rollout and future development of 5G, both in the UK and internationally?
Okay, well, the non-terrestrial component I know was mentioned in several of the presentations today. Tony, I know it's strong in the minds of the UK at least. How do you see the non-terrestrial component being an integral part of 5G in the future?
It clearly has a role to play in delivering ubiquitous coverage in remote areas. I think the challenge in the past has been uplink speeds and capacity and cost, and the inability of satellites to communicate directly with consumer handsets particularly. But we are seeing increasing engagement with a number of players. We certainly have a strong space industry in the UK, as represented on various parts of our programme. And we also have, of course, the satellite applications catapult that plays a big role in pushing forward, thinking about space and its place in this HETnet, as we talked about earlier, of solutions that will provide us with the kind of configurable solutions we need everywhere. But we certainly are going to see the 5G satellite, or the satellite version of 5G, being worked on significantly. And we have collaborations going on with both European and the UK Space Agency in our programme. So we're going to see more of it. I think it does play a role. We've got a project coming up. I can't give too many details yet because it hasn't been announced formally, but there's a project that's being funded in a space that M&S would be very interested in, with remote media capture for filming live sporting events in deep rural environments. Clearly, space is going to play a role in that, and in getting content back to base for editing and distribution. There's no question about that over time that's going to be weaved in. It's just not there quite yet, but it's certainly coming.
Guy, do we have time to squeeze one further question in?
I think we do, Adrian. I think we've got time just for one more question, then we need to end. The question is, there is a lot of focus around 5G and verticals and vertical industry and how it can help with vertical industries. But will we start to see a greater focus of 5G plus technologies and services on addressing broader societal needs rather than the manufacturing heavy industry type focus we talk about today?
That's a very good question, and I guess one of the societal needs we've witnessed ourselves in the last few months is the urgent need to have a proximity tracing standard that could be used globally so that we can tackle the COVID situation we're in now. So there are many cases where we have these societal needs which aren't going to make anybody any profit, but it's incumbent on us to provide solutions for them. Would any of my panelists like to tackle societal needs in the context of 5G?
Okay, so what I was saying, that like for things like proximity tracing is a capability that doesn't rely on 5G. As a matter of fact, almost everybody, given the urgency of situation, have created proximity solution, but you need standards and you need regulatory control and a proper trade-off between the privacy we lose with proximity tracing versus the benefits of proximity tracing. And therefore, while the potential of having a good connectivity, the potential of having a broad thing can be enabled, and 5G can play a supporting role, the true social transformation will be coming not just from 5G alone, but from the end applications. What we create what we create on our smartphones connected on 5G, as well as what type of devices, new devices that get affordable connectivity, the use of affordable AI at the edges that can give us the more social impact. Those will be the real transformers of social benefit. The applications at the end devices or in the cloud service that 5G connects, as opposed to the raw capacity of 5G itself.
Thank you, Dinesh. Let's go across to Tony.
So this is an area that we've put a huge focus into, as what we term connected communities, both urban and rural, and those are communities which are great places to live. They're places that are not polluted. They're not congested. They're economically vibrant. They have good public sector services. They have good spaces that are healthy and productive. I think there's many different angles on that, but I think 5G is part of the experiment to see whether 5G can help to drive those kinds of communities for us all to live in, and that's certainly part of the UK program, the 5G Testbeds and Trials program's mission is to explore both the place-based application of 5G as well as the vertical markets. So we see both playing a key role, but it's still a puzzle and a question for us as to quite how those two interact together to give the optimal result. We're still thinking about it.
Great. And Pei Ying, would you like to comment on that one as well?
Sure, yeah. I think one of the things we kind of artificially segmented this, EMBB, UILC, MMTC, this usage scenario. In a way, we kind of classify vertical versus, personal usage. In fact, many of these 5G use cases are kind of in between. So even though you can call it a vertical, but they kind of connected with consumer use case scenario and so on. So in broad sense, we're talking about, you hear lots of talking about the vertical, but in fact, those vertical are quite related to the society improvement. Like, for example, even we look at the, use case for the AR, VR stuff. We can use those use cases for the industrial setting, for training, for hospital remote, diagnosis and so on. So it's covered many aspects. And one of the things we also hope that is it will make some changes that we can intelligently use the 5G system so that we can reduce the power, power consumption and so on, make the things working more effectively, even for the agriculture. You can monitor the environment and so on, so that we can have some impact on the on our, always our mind about global warming or stuff. Yeah. So there's many things I think we can do definitely to improve, other than the vertical, maybe narrowly defined as a manufacturing, and that's not only cases. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think we've got Adrian back.
Yes, I'm back with you. Sorry about that. My audio dropped. Thank you, Guy, for taking over.
And also illustrates the need for 5G everywhere, Adrian.
Even in rural France.
Yeah.
Thank you, Guy. I think with this, I should hand back to you.
Thank you, Adrian. And thanks to all our guests. Great discussion. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us. Now, we'll be back again tomorrow with more presentations, testing our bandwidth, and our second and final live Q&A program. And tomorrow we'll be looking further ahead towards 6G technologies. We hope you can join us for another great day of presentations. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.